It was a cold Friday night and I was home alone. My spine tingled with cold realization, transforming a routine TV night into an adrenaline-pumping survival story. I would discover that even a seemingly safe home could harbor danger lurking beneath the surface. It was a Friday night and I was home alone. It was the kind of blustery cold night when you curl up in bed and attempt to catch up on your favorite shows on television. That evening I was doing precisely this. I took a seat on the living room couch. Since I had recently moved here, I had never bothered to hang curtains, and the couch faced away from the window. I was becoming impatient as I flipped through the channels in an attempt to find something to watch. I stayed in the living room even though it didn't seem like anything fascinating was happening, and I wasn't sure if it was a sign for me to leave. I finally chose a channel that aired vintage films from the 2000s. I decided to get a bowl of fruits I usually keep in the refrigerator as I got up from the couch so I could snack on them while watching the show. It didn't take me less than 3 minutes to walk to the kitchen. Since my cottage was small and had steps, I never really enjoyed going upstairs. After 2 weeks of living here, I had the entire apartment memorized, so I didn't switch on the lights in the kitchen. I also didn't need to because the kitchen was small and had a streetlight that cast a gentle yellow illumination over the sink and window. I quickly headed to the refrigerator and began rummaging through it. I hadn't noticed that the kitchen was darker than normal because I was too preoccupied with digging through the fridge. I had to stoop to locate my fruit bowl, which was located in the refrigerator's lower section. I grabbed it and shut the refrigerator, stuffing the snack into my lips with desire. I noticed it when I turned around. Standing in the front yard is a man. His features were just barely visible to me, but one thing was certain. He was taller than me. I was in a panic, not knowing what to say or do, but one thing was certain, he couldn't see me. His back was to the window, and although he wasn't facing the kitchen, I could feel my pulse rate quicken as each second went by. He merely stood with his back to the street. He approached it slowly, and I breathed a sigh of relief. In the kitchen, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Why had I believed there would be any harm? I laughed once more, but the idea of the man returning made me shudder and made me check the locks on the rear door. With a plan to move past the incident, I headed to the living room. I took a seat on the couch and tried to catch up on the movie by concentrating on what was on the screen. Long into the night, most likely hours thereafter, I detected a slight sound. I dismissed it because it had played over the movie I was watching, but I heard that faint sound again at a different scene, like the sound of metal rattling. I tried to concentrate on the sound and lowered the volume a little, at which point I became aware of what I was hearing. I was momentarily happy that I had left the door locked when I saw someone attempting to unlock the back door and shaking the doorknob as forcefully as they could. With my heart rate increasing, I hurried to the kitchen. I could feel my own breath as I fixed my gaze on the door. I could immediately see the offender through the glass, the dude from before. Now that I could see him well, it was almost unbearable to see. With his teeth a darker hue and the whites of his eyes a brighter yellow, he smiled through the door. I started to tremble in fear. After licking the glass, he reached out and waved his knife-wielding right hand at the door. I realized I was in more danger than I had thought as he waved the rifle back and forth. Eager to go in, he yanked the handle hard. I screamed as loudly as I could as the door began to shake and rattle. I realized that I had awakened everyone in the neighborhood with my loud scream. The sounds of footsteps crossing the yard had reassured me if I wasn't already convinced. A voice yelled, "Hey you, what the hell are you doing there?" As I turned to look at one of my neighbors who was playing a riffle. He was gesturing to the insane person. When I turned to face the man at my door, he merely glanced at my neighbor and his weapon without saying anything. I saw the man retreat slowly and try to get away. The sound of footsteps retreating got faint, but my neighbor remained where he was, holding the rifle up as if he meant to shoot. "Go on, you wild animal!" My neighbor gave a cheer. I came out to thank him after it had quieted down enough. In response, he said how fortunate I had been and what a wise decision it had been to keep the door locked. I nodded, pleased that this was all over, but I also knew that spending the night at home by myself wouldn't be peaceful. I couldn't help but worry what could have occurred if the door hadn't been locked, or even worse, if I hadn't screamed. A shiver ran down my spine as I saw the stranger from upstairs approach me. I was going to experience the scariest day of my life, and it all began on a routine Tuesday night. It was a typical Tuesday night at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. The sun had just set and I had finished my shift for the day. Before I reached my driveway, everything seemed like it would always be this way. Myrtle, my neighbor, was out getting her mail. I knew I wouldn't be arriving home late because she did this every evening. She called out to me from where she stood next to her mailbox while I waved back. Since Tommy was causing a disturbance in that house, he must have returned home early. As she leaned down to support her back, she spoke. She was becoming older, but her hearing was still very good. My spouse, Tommy, was a doctor with an insane schedule. He was usually home before me, but this week he got caught up in what he referred to as the rush week. I laughed. I'll tell him not to talk about it. After parking my car in the driveway, I took a few minutes to sit in it, trying to gather myself after such a hectic day. I glanced around. I said to myself, "That's odd," as I noticed Tom's car wasn't in the driveway. I dismissed it, assuming he had gotten a call at work. It occasionally occurred during these busy periods. Gazing up at the bedroom window, I got out of the automobile. A habitual force. I noticed someone's shadow observing me from below. I blinked as it vanished. I shook my head, certain that I must be really exhausted from today's duty. I required aspirin. I moved to the front door and turned the handle. Surprised, I clicked and the door opened. I couldn't figure out why Tom would have left the home unlocked. He must have rushed out. He was always the one who was more worried about safety. I ignored this, but I couldn't stop thinking about the figure I had been having hallucinations of. After leaving my bag on the kitchen island, I went to get a drink. As I was moving through the refrigerator, I heard a faint noise coming from above, the foot moving. The house was built approximately 10 years ago, so it wasn't particularly ancient when we moved in, but the upstairs floorboards were often creaking. Silently closing the refrigerator, I began to believe that Tommy might be home and attempting to pull a surprise on me, something small that he liked to do every now and then. I grabbed my phone and let out a loud cry. "I'm heading up there, Tommy." As I dialed his number and waited for the phone to ring, I laughed. I was standing at the foot of the staircase that divided the living room from the kitchen. I concentrated my attention on the little hallway down to my left, which was right before you stepped into the living room. Tommy answered when my phone rang, and I heard the upstairs shuffle becoming louder and longer. "I see you playing tricks." I smirked, knowing he could hear me. I said, "You won't scare me this time. I'm ready for your shenanigans." "What are you talking about, Stacy?" he inquired, sounding nearly sincere in his confusion. "Oh, please, stop acting that way. I can hear you moving upstairs and I know you're hiding at home," I said, grinning even now. It seemed as though I had finally defeated him at his own game. With a slightly agitated tone, he questioned, "Stacy, where are you?" It appeared he had moved to the upstairs hallway, so I waited for footsteps. "Why am I standing at the top of the steps?" His next few words were desperate, but they came to me gradually, like if I were witnessing a slow-motion film clip. He cried out, "Get out of the house! There's someone else there. I'm coming and I'm calling the police." As he was finishing up, I heard footsteps rushing down the corridor, and it dawned on me that it wasn't Tommy. The footsteps became louder, so I turned and tried to move in the direction of the entrance. Whoever it was, I knew they were behind me. There was nothing but a few feet in front of me where I could see the door, and then I felt a hand come around my arm. The person pulled me backwards, and I felt flat on my stomach. I shouted. Above me was a man wearing an all-black outfit. His mask obscured his face, so I couldn't see it, but I could see intent in his eyes. I kicked him in the balls when he reached down to grab me, screaming as he reached for his genitalia. As I stood up to try to get away, he grabbed my hand and applied as much pressure as he could. I thought that this was it, that there would never be another opportunity to see Tom. As he put pressure on me, I let out another scream. The man pushed me to the side and left through the door as the sounds of sirens suddenly filled the air, and I continued to scream. A not very wise decision. Raise your hands upwards. It was getting dark outside, and I could hear the police yelling. I woke up in a hospital bed with Tom lying next to me. He gave me a hug and told me what was going on. They looked for evidence of a robbery when the individual broke in earlier in the day, but nothing was taken. But there was one thing Tom mentioned that really got me perspiring. He had a revolver and a little handgun on him when the police found him. I feel a chill down my spine every time I consider the near miss. If I hadn't escaped for my life during spring break, I wonder what may have happened to me. Though it's a difficult tale, let's begin at the beginning. I was cooped up inside for the first few days of spring break. Having grown up outside, my parents didn't like the concept and thought I should get out more. I made the decision to go on lengthy strolls in the park while pretending to catch up with pals. I emerged from one of these walks a little later than normal. It was getting dark outside, and it appeared like everyone was going the other way. I was thankful for the fresh air because it was a touch cool, but that didn't last long when I turned down the street. I felt a strange feeling in my stomach, and the street appeared to be empty. The deserted street and the intuition were nothing out of the ordinary. I became a little suspicious because I saw a lot of horror movies and thought the street was always deserted. The path led directly to the park. When I eventually made it inside the park, I was thankful that there were still people there because I focused all of my attention on my phone while walking there. For a while, I buried myself in social media while I sat on a bench, but the weird feeling kept coming back. I felt as though I was being observed. I decided I'd gotten enough fresh air when I cast a fashionable glance over my shoulder to avoid being caught. I couldn't see anyone there either. I stood up and walked back to the entrance, the feeling growing stronger as I went home. It was 11 p.m. when I checked my phone because I had been outside for a long time. The sound of footsteps approaching from behind caused me to quicken my speed in an attempt to reach home. It was just far enough away to not be regarded as stalking, but not too far either. When I turned back, I saw two large, burly men approaching me at a sluggish pace. A single man crossed the street. His pace was marginally quicker than that of the chap on my side. Since they were on opposing sides of the street, I had no idea if they were together, but I didn't wait to find out. I heard the other men's pace increasing as I ran down the street. I could feel the rapid pounding of my heart in my chest. I'm going to die, holy crap. Muttering to myself, I tried to find a shortcut home as I sliced through an alley. I realized I couldn't take these men back to my apartment even if I ran as quickly as I could. I turned since I knew it would be risky. I turned and headed for the bright lights of a 7-Eleven, thankful that one was so nearby, for I could hear the squeak in their shoes as they were closing in on me. When I turned around at the door after crossing the parking lot to see how close they were, I discovered that they were standing near the lot's edge. They did not advance even a single inch. After entering the building, I contacted my parents and the girl behind the desk to explain who I was while she called the police. From the counter, we observed the men waiting until they heard the sirens of the police cars and started to back off. I was relieved to see my parents 4 minutes later, but I couldn't shake the unsettling thought that I wouldn't feel secure going on these outings any longer. After informing them of everything that had transpired and observing their expressions of anxiety and relief, I made the decision to stop going for walks in the evenings.